Dan Quinn went in on his team's inability to cash in on winning time moments, but to me, it didn't happen because of lack of creativity. It happened because of the wrong kind of creativity.
You are Locked On Commanders, your daily podcast on the Washington Commanders. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
This is Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, the #1 sports podcast network around. I'm David Harrison, your guy on the ground, credential member of the media, covering the Washington Commanders for WUSA 9, also writing for Commanders on SI, and of course, I'm here with you 5 days a week. Coming up on today's episode, DQ all but verified that the Commanders will have to face an improved Eagles defensive line with another makeshift offensive line, and honestly, I think it's a great thing for the team's future. And even with Chris Rodriguez Jr. coming back this weekend, there is a real chance that Washington won't be able to move the ball at the middle any better than they did last week. So the answer is going to be moving the launch point and changing where the middle of the field really is. But first, Dan Quinn went in on his team's inability to cash in on those winning time moments. But to me, it wasn't a lack of creativity. It was the wrong kind of creativity. All of that coming up on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. So kicked off the post-holiday season talking to Dan Quinn on Monday, and in his two press conferences that I get to cover anyways, his general press conference with all of us via Zoom. You don't hear my voice on the Zoom because I'm usually in the room listening to the Zoom questions coming in and listening to Dan answer them, and then we kick right on over to the team facility for the WUSA 9 one-on-one that John Duran conducts. And I sit in on that so I can write the story that goes up on WUSA9.com. So that's where I am during all of these interviews. So you don't hear my voice, but definitely in the building, in the room, and all those things. And so Dan Quinn went in on his team's inability to win in those winning time moments, or to cash in on those winning time moments. It's been part of his mantra since he got here. It's one of the reasons the team does so many 2-minute drills in training camp, practices, all that kind of stuff. It's one of the reasons they do the 4-minute drill so much, to try to kill the end of a half or the end of a game. All those things, those winning time moments. And it really started off right in the beginning of the game, because winning time moments don't just come at the end of the half, end of the game. They also come early in the game sometimes. And heading into week 17, the Washington Commanders, so week 17 was the game against the Dallas Cowboys. The Washington Commanders had a top 10 red zone offense. Now, coming out of week 17, they still do have a top 10 red zone offense, but certainly not as good as it was before. Before week 17, they were converting roughly 60% of their trips into the red zone into touchdowns. However, against the Dallas Cowboys, that number dropped to 33%. One time out of the 3 times the Commanders entered the red zone did they find a touchdown. Dan Quinn said Monday, quote, "Sometimes just when the moments of the game change, when it's all right, we got the big run with Debo and we're down inside the 2 or 3 yard line. We need points with that." So those moments, yes, not being able to nail them and recognize this is that play, this is that moment that calls for the hyper focus, to not nail those in all 3 phases. That's been challenging for sure, and something that I'm digging in as hard as we can, but that has to be much improved for damn sure, end quote. And of course, Dan starts off with the offense there, eventually goes into the entire team, right? So the defense has to stand up in the winning time moments. The offense has to stand up in those winning time moments. But I wanted to look at the offense specifically here, and the 41-yard catch and run that Debo Samuel pulled off early in the game that Dan Quinn was referring to. It gets the ball down to the Dallas Cowboys 6-yard line. From there, the Washington Commanders end up running the ball once with Jacory Croskey-Merritt to the left for a gain of 2 yards, once up the middle for a gain of 1 yard, and then they try a pass play. Josh Johnson ends up sacked for a loss of 8 yards, and they end up with a Jake Moody 29-yard field goal. And instead of tying the game at 7 early, they get points, but they stay down 7-3 and an opportunity to try to win the game. It wasn't the only one. Again, they scored 1 touchdown in 3 tries. The 1 touchdown they did score was a 10-yard run. So getting close to the line of scrimmage, or close to the goal line, really was the problem for the Washington Commanders. You end up with another drive later in the game where they're inside the Dallas Cowboys 5, and they pass the ball twice, run the ball once. And in that moment, there were a lot of people texting me, a lot of people on Twitter, all kinds of stuff saying, here we go again with Kliff Kingsbury, trying to throw the ball close to the goal line instead of trying to run it. The problem is you're also not able to run the ball all that effectively the closer you get down to the goal line. Part of the reason you're not able to run the ball down close to the goal line, honestly, just quite simply, the absence of Chris Rodriguez Jr., right? He has been the guy that we refer to as kind of the hammer of this run game all season long. Chris Rodriguez Jr. has been the kind of the most consistent between the guards, even between the tackles, fall forward. type of guy. And when we saw, a few weeks ago where they were just kind of insisting for some reason on getting Jacory Croskey-Merritt a goal line touchdown late in the game or in the game, everybody's kind of wondering, like, where's Chris Rodriguez, man? And it comes down to a 4th and short. They bring Chris Rodriguez in to convert the 4th and short. He converts it because that's what he does. He gets those tough yards, and then they go right back to Bill. And again, it's no shade to Bill. It's no disliking of Bill. It's just an understanding of where your best players are and where they're best in the field. And I think that's where you hear Dan Quinn, again, going back to that quote, not being able to nail them and recognize that this is that play, this is that moment that calls for the hyper focus. I think that's really important. And he's not just talking about the players. He's talking about his coaches. He's talking about Kliff Kingsbury, understanding what you need to do in the game situation, situational leadership, situational awareness, all of that stuff. Now, again, against the Dallas Cowboys last week on Christmas Day, no Chris Rodriguez Jr. He ends up with an illness. He's not able to play. I got it. So you don't have that power football presence because Chris Rodriguez is not out there. You've got to find a way to do some other things. And to Kliff Kingsbury's credit, there were some differences. And then what we've seen in there was some motion. Granted, some of the motion is similar to some of the motion we've seen in other running plays. But there was zero lead blocking. I went back and watched all of the goal line plays, all of the, down in the 6-yard line, 5-yard line plays. And what I really noticed was a very noticeable lack of ISO type runs, nobody being used as like a fullback type, like Ben Sinnott again. And it might be getting a little bit annoying, to be quite honest with you, how much we go back to this but it's an important Adam Peters, when he drafted Ben Sinnott, said he's a Kyle Juszczyk type of player. Well, if you have a Kyle Juszczyk, look at the San Francisco 49ers. If you have a Ricard, look at the Baltimore Ravens. And I understand they're more kind of that traditional fullback than Ben Sinnott is, but Ben Sinnott has that ability. John Bates has great blocking ability. And these are guys that are going to go in, they're going to crash a hole, they're going to do what they need to do. Not having them lead block on any of these runs just doesn't make sense to me. And it almost seems like that's what they're going to expect us to do. Too many times you'd see maybe John Bates go in motion, Ben Sinnott go in motion, and where he ends up blocking, they're actually trying to open a hole behind that, or opposite of that, trying to get like a backside cut lane open, almost trying to say, like, we're going to use this motion and use this blocking, picture to make the defense think we're going this way when we're actually going the other way. And you're just trying to outsmart people, which, again, you can see the theory behind it, where we're not going to out physical you, so let's outsmart you. Well, again, one way you can try to out physical a running back that doesn't have that hammer presence is give the hammer in front of him. Put the hammer in front of him in John Bates, in Ben Sinnott. I mean, I've seen teams use D tackles, put Johnny Newton in there as a fullback and let him plow through a hole. Like, get creative in other ways. Don't just get creative in one way and say, this is how we're going to be creative all the time. Because again, we've seen that motion, backside cut, run action before from the Washington Commanders. And if we've seen it, the Eagles have seen it, the Cowboys have seen it, everybody's seen it. So again, it's not that Kliff Kingsbury didn't try to get creative with finding a way to get those short yard successes in the red zone. It's that I think he's going about it the wrong way. He's not necessarily going into the full bag of tricks that an offensive coordinator has to design those opportunities for his team. And I think that's where the problem lies. And even with Chris Rodriguez Jr. coming back this week, unfortunately, Philadelphia Eagles are also going to be better than the last time we saw them. Jalen Carter should be back in the mix for the Philadelphia Eagles defensive front. So you still might not be able to move the ball up the middle all that much using the same old tricks you've been using before. So the answer is going to be moving the launch point, changing where the middle of the field really is, so the guys like Jalen Carter can't make that impact. That and more coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is brought to you in part by Gusto. Let's be real. No one starts a business for the joy of calculating tax withholdings or managing payroll spreadsheets. Like, when you've got that business dream in your eye, you're not thinking about that kind of stuff. Well, that's where Gusto comes in to take the stress out of payroll, benefits, and HR, so you can focus on running your business and supporting your team. Gusto is the all-in-one remote-friendly payroll and HR platform that makes managing your team simple, transparent, and fast. Whether you're hiring, onboarding, or paying your employees, Gusto helps you do it all from one place without the hassle of hidden fees. Unlimited payroll runs for one monthly price means there's no surprise charges at the end of the month, and Gusto's automated tools like offer letters, onboarding materials, and direct deposits can save you hours every single week. And knowing you can reach certified HR experts anytime gives you real peace of mind. So try Gusto today at gusto.com/LockedOnNFL. Get 3 months free when you run your first payroll. That's right. 3 months of free payroll at gusto.com/lockedonnfl. One more time. That's gusto.com/lockedonnfl. Thank you for making Locked On Commanders your first listen of the day and every day to the everydayers. Those of you who come through for every single episode, special thank you goes out to you for coming through for yet another one. To everybody, thank you for helping to make Locked On the #1 sports podcast network around. And if you're a true Washington Commanders fan, the Everyday All Access tier is built for you. You'll get one-on-one text access with me, all access episodes, an exclusive newsletter, and a 15% discount to the Locked On merch store, plus more. So head over to lockedoncommanders.supercast.com to join the Everydayer Club and unlock that all access tier. You can also find a link to that in the show notes, whether you're on YouTube or audio. There is a link in the show notes, no matter where you are partaking in today's episode. Chris Rodriguez Jr. missed the Christmas Day matchup against the Dallas Cowboys with an illness, which explains at least partially why the Washington Commanders were not able to establish a physical up the middle rushing attack, especially down near the goal line. But he should be back this week. There is a real chance, however, that with the Philadelphia Eagles interior defensive line getting better and some of the offensive line issues the Washington Commanders are going through, which we'll talk about here in just a little bit, that the Washington Commanders may still find it hard to run up the middle. So I think the way that Kliff Kingsbury could, I'm not even going to say should, right? Because I'm not going to sit here and pretend that I know more about crafting and running offenses than Kliff Kingsbury does, but I do know a thing or two because I've been around, I've seen a thing or two. There are some things that we don't necessarily see Kliff Kingsbury do a lot of. I wouldn't say we never see him do them, but we don't see him do a lot of that I think could possibly help against a defense like the Philadelphia Eagles. So you have to first identify the skills of your running backs, right? So you've got your haymaker, Jacory Croskey-Merritt, 72-yard touchdown run, kind of the big explosive run we've all kind of been waiting for from Bill, because we've seen the ability. We've seen him almost get it a lot of times this year, and then boom, all of a sudden it just kind of went off against the Dallas Cowboys there. And listen, it went off right tackle, which is something that, again, if you're an everydayer and you listen to a lot of our pregame episodes and our strategies and our how did this team do this, we've talked about it. The right side of the Washington Commanders run offense is their strongest side this year. That's Josh Conerly Jr. and usually Sam Cosmi. Now, the question this week was going to be, with Andrew Wiley filling in for Sam Cosmi, who's back on IR, how impactful was that really going to be? Marcus Mosher, Locked On Cowboys, also pointed to Donovan Ezaraku, the Dallas Cowboys rookie edge defender, who has been getting better in run defense and plays that side of the defense for the Dallas Cowboys. The Cowboys' left side, which is the Commanders' right side, when you're on offense. And those things were certainly going to matter, right? But what we saw is, even without Sam Cosmi and even with Donovan Ezaraku getting better as a run defender, according to Locked On Cowboys, the Washington Commanders were able to make some money there. They were able to make some hay there. The 72-yard touchdown run comes there specifically, but also some good runs to that side throughout the game. Specifically, Dan Quinn highlighted Josh Conerly Jr. for being right in the middle of some of those key blocks. And I think it just kind of showcases some of the progression that Josh Conerly has gone through this year as well. But of course, Jacory Croskey-Merritt obviously isn't the only back in the backfield. He's not the guy that can do it by himself. We talked about Chris Rodriguez Jr., the hammer. He's got, of the three running backs, Jacory Croskey-Merritt, Chris Rodriguez, and Jeremy McNichols, Chris Rodriguez has the best up the middle numbers between the guards, even inside the tackles. He's got the best up the middle numbers, which is what you would expect stylistically from watching Chris Rodriguez Jr. play. Jeremy McNichols is not a better up the middle runner. So even, if the thought is out there, well, don't put Jacory Croskey-Merritt up the middle, put, Jeremy McNichols up the middle. That doesn't even work necessarily. Jacory Croskey-Merritt averaged 1.5 yards per carry on the goal line. He's a fighter. He's a scrapper. He's going to give it his all. But the bottom line is it's just not there, right? He doesn't have the ability to push the pile the way that a guy like Chris Rodriguez does. Jeremy McNichols, not really any better in that aspect. So again, without the hammer there against the Dallas Cowboys, you kind of understand why that ability wasn't there. So with Chris coming back and the potential that ability is not going to be there again this week because of the presence of Jalen Carter returning to the Philadelphia Eagles, if he does indeed play in this game, which I expect he will, you might have a problem there too. So if you can't move the pile, even with Chris Rodriguez, to me, you got to change where the pile is, or you got to change the launch point of the play. You have to stop running your high red zone plays inside the low red zone, right? So like high red zone, like 20-yard line, 13-yard line, something like that. Low red zone, 5-yard line in between, or to the goal line. And then, your intermediate red zone is between all that. So I think when you get to the 1 to 5 yard line, there's a few options that I've come up with that I think we don't see enough from Kliff Kingsbury's offense that could work against this Philadelphia Eagles defense. The first of them being a sprint out rollout, right? Even with Josh Johnson, obviously Marcus Mariota, Dan Quinn did say that there is hope that Marcus is going to be able to play. There's a possibility that Marcus is going to be able to play. If he can't play, the plan is for Josh Johnson to start once again. Josh, even though he's older, does have mobility. He does have that ability to extend plays. And I think that he would benefit from the ability to kind of roll out, sprint outside the pocket, just immediately get out the pocket. Don't worry about trying to penetrate the middle of the line. If the middle of the line isn't the middle of the line anymore, if you roll him out, that middle line, Jalen Carter now becomes a left defensive end. And that's really not even an accurate way to describe it, but hopefully you get what I'm saying. Like, Jalen Carter is not in the middle of the play. Jalen Carter can't plug the middle of the play. Now, obviously on a rollout, unless it's a quarterback rollout keeper, you're not really running the ball, right? But what you do is you kind of eliminate the strength of the Philadelphia Eagles defense, which is that interior middle part of the field or of their defensive line. You force Jalen Carter to run left to right, which gets those guys tired. And listen, if you do it early on too, get Jalen Carter moving left to right, that might give you the opportunity in those short yard, right? This is chess. You got to do this like 6 moves in a row. Run some screens, run some roll Josh Johnson left, roll him right, run to the edges, make Jalen Carter run all over that stinking field so that maybe, 8 plays, 3 minutes, 42 seconds, he's running left and right and running all over the field. You get down to the goal line situation. You have an interior offensive line. You tell him to dig down deep, find that energy. You run Ben Sinnott through the A gap, and you run Jacory Croskey-Merritt behind him. You may be able to push Jalen Carter off the point of attack because you've been able to exhaust him. If you don't do that, even still, roll out, sprint out, flood those receivers to the one side of the formation, and see if you can either get a guy open or you can get Josh Johnson a running lane and give yourself an opportunity. Another potential plan, shovel pass. And shovel passes, they always make me a little bit nervous, man, because they take a lot of coordination, a lot of timing. So this isn't something that on game day, like this is something where like Kliff Kingsbury's got to be working on this thing already. Like Monday, they have to have been like, hey, we're going to institute a shovel pass here. Don't see a lot of that here. Slip a tight end underneath into a gap that doesn't require a double team to win and get your guy open for a shovel pass. And maybe you get that D-line to be aggressive coming up field. And what you actually do is you basically get the ball behind Jalen Carter and those other guys before they're able to make a big play on the ball. So again, like I said, it's always a little bit nerve-wracking. I actually go back to last year. You remember that, what was it, like flea flicker screen pass that they ran? Like I like that kind of stuff. It kind of attacks the middle of the field. It's a little bit of a trick type play. I mean, play actions are still technically trick plays, things like that. But you want to try to get the defense reacting to one thing, hit them with another thing. But you don't have to get super cute. It doesn't have to be, a triple reverse, throw back pass, whatever. Like it doesn't have to be super spicy. It can be run-of-the-mill trick play. Like I said, play action, roll out into the flat, get your quarterback outside the pocket and into open space. Use a shovel pass where you get the defense reacting to one play and then you hit them behind it with another play. Another one, rub routes, right? And look, the league has been, at least in for my calculation, I haven't counted compared to last year, but it does kind of look like the league is cracking down on picks a little bit from wide receivers, a little bit more than usual. But if you can get a rub route going, if you can get that man matchup, typically in goal line, you're in man, get that man matchup, things like that. Look, go back to that play last week, right? They had the play action on, and Terry McLaurin was running that quick slant, and it was wide open. Josh Johnson just came off the read, didn't see it, whatever it was, that he didn't hit it. Try to go back to Bill on the front side of the play. Run that again. See if you can get it open again and see if you can't convert that for a touchdown against this Eagles defense. So a few options here for the Washington Commanders for Kliff Kingsbury. Again, I think he's trying to get creative. I think he's trying to find a solution. I got it. But I think there's some other things that he hasn't done yet that he can do. And that's not a criticism. Like there's, I mean, it could be a criticism 17 weeks in, got it. But, you have to try things first to see if they're going to work or not. If they don't work, then you come up with the other thing. So again, after seeing what they did try to do without C-Rod in the mix against Dallas Cowboys, understanding that even with Chris Rodriguez back, the Eagles defense might be stout enough that you're not going to have success anyway. Those are some ideas that the Washington Commanders could institute this week to help them get better at that. Dan Quinn all but verified that the Washington Commanders are going to have to face that improved Eagles defensive line with another makeshift offensive line. And honestly, for me, in this context, in this situation, I couldn't be happier. That's coming up next on today's episode of Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode of Locked On Commanders brought to you by Prize Picks. This episode is brought to you by Prize Picks. Whether you're starting a new routine or you're jumping into player projections for the first time, trying something new can feel like a little bit of a challenge, but with Prize Picks, it always feels good to be right. With high-pressure football matchups every weekend and elite hoops action almost every night, the action never slows down, and Prize Picks lets you stay in control. Prize Picks is the daily fantasy app that makes watching sports even more exciting by letting you build lineups based on your player projections, and no drafts, no waiting. You just pick more or less and play your way. Getting started on Prize Picks is quick and it's simple, and it's super easy to navigate the app. Super user intuitive, all those things. It's made watching games more engaging, especially when you're following individual player performances, not just team successes. And I love the flexibility, like options like the flex play, where you can still actually get paid even if one of your picks misses. So download the Prize Picks app today. Use the code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after you play your first $5 lineup. That's code LOCKEDONNFL to get $50 in lineups after your first $5 lineup on Prize Picks. It's good to be right. In his Monday press conference, Dan Quinn all but verified to us that the Washington Commanders are going to be using another makeshift offensive line against his Philadelphia Eagles defensive line that looks like it's probably going to be better than the last Philadelphia Eagles defensive line this team saw. And honestly, with the season the way it's gone, with the playoffs, obviously not a possibility, I'm actually all for it because I think you have a lot of questions for the future that you need to answer. I think Tyler Biadasz has basically proven his value to this team. No, he's not the best center in the National Football League, but he's definitely not the worst in the National Football League either. He's likely going to be out. He suffered ankle and knee injuries against the Dallas Cowboys, and Dan Quinn said it's a very high climb for him to be able to be ready for this weekend. Laramie Tunsil, DQ sounded a little bit more confident that he might be able to play, but still got a little bit of a vibe that he may not be able to play, which means Brandon Coleman would be in there for him again. And Sam Cosmi, obviously, he's on IR, so he's not playing either, which means that your left tackle would likely be Brandon Coleman, your center would likely be Nick Allegretti, and your right guard would likely be Andrew Wiley, going along with left guard Chris Paul and right tackle Josh Conerly Jr. So a very, quote-unquote makeshift line. But again, Laramie Tunsil, I don't see any issues with his contract. I know there's going to be contract talks this offseason and all this other stuff. I don't see any issues with that getting done. I think that'll get, rectified and that'll get handled itself. But I think Brandon Coleman, it's an opportunity, and he's taking advantage of this opportunity. It started when Laramie first got injured a few weeks ago. Brandon had to step in. Then he had to play against the Dallas Cowboys. He himself got injured, but it looks like he's going to be good to go. Now he's got this opportunity. And I told Brandon after the game against the Dallas Cowboys, I said, man, this season has just thrown everything it can at you personally. But I told him, I was like, man, you should be proud. I think you've done a really good job of taking it on, handling it, and coming out better. And he was appreciative of that conversation. And I think this is one last opportunity this season for him to show that, to showcase that, and to cement himself as a part of the future of this organization. And listen, I know there's always going to be people who, even if he's just a swing tackle, even if he's one of the key backup offensive linemen, are always going to be like, this is a third-round pick for a backup offensive lineman. But I'll tell you right now, man, offensive line depth is hard to find, and offensive line depth is hard to build. So having that opportunity, plus, give him an offseason to work on his issues and work on everything, open up the door for him and Chris Paul to battle it out next year. I did promise one YouTube commenter that I would stop forgetting to also mention Timothy McKay for the future. Remember, Timothy McKay is a guy who was brought in. He had an injury. He's basically been just kind of developing behind the scenes. Don't get to see him in practice, so I can't tell you how much he's developed, but he's a young prospect that the team was excited about when they brought him in for sure. So he's going to be, in the mix next year, hopefully, obviously healthy. And then, for Andrew Wiley, Nick Allegretti, this is their opportunity. I think they did a pretty good job against the Dallas Cowboys, but this Philadelphia Eagles defense is different than that Cowboys defense. So if they can hold up, don't have to be perfect, but they can do well against the Eagles defense, you're showing a reason why, listen, depth is important. And this is opportunity for Coleman, Wiley, and Allegretti, all three of them, to show the Commanders, we're worthy of keeping around. Allegretti's under contract. Coleman's under contract. Wiley's a pending free agent, but Allegretti is a guy that, more than a few people have projected is might be cut this offseason, things like that. So I think that it's important for these guys to go out there. And also, if, again, the Dallas Cowboys performance is already solid. I think Bobby Johnson deserves a lot of credit for the job that he's done keeping this unit together. If they can go out there and have a really good game against Philadelphia Eagles, it just kind of hat tips to him even more so than it already has. So again, you got a patchwork offensive line against a Super Bowl contender, and this Super Bowl contender, that defensive front has been arguably the strength of their team for not just this season, but even last season. So win or lose, this team, these players, this front office, this coaching staff, they've got 60 more minutes left in the season to show that they need to be brought back in 2026. And I think that every single person we talked about in this episode, to include coaches like Kliff Kingsbury, they very much need to approach this Philadelphia Eagles game as that. It's not an audition, per se, even though that's kind of how we're labeling it. But it is an opportunity for you to show like, hey, you are part of the solution moving forward, not part of the problem. That's going to do it for today's episode. Next time on Locked On Commanders, we're going to get even deeper, breaking down what's going on with this team, what is really on the line in Week 18, because it's not playoffs and it's not just pride. So all that coming up this week. Make sure you're subscribed. Follow along on Locked On Commanders so you get all the latest episodes. You can also follow me on X at DHarrison82 or on Instagram at DHarrison_82 or on both if you really want to. And if you never miss an episode, the Everydayer Club is literally built for you. If you're an everydayer, you should be part of the Everydayer Club, right? Get Locked On Commanders ad-free, members-only Discord access, and more. Head over to lockedoncommanders.supercast.com to join the club. And for your next listen, check out the Locked On NFL podcast. Tyler Rowland in the morning, Tony Wiggins in the afternoon, giving you a double dose of everything happening in the National Football League. That's available on YouTube or wherever you're listening to this podcast. To the Everydayers, I see you. I appreciate you every single day. And to everybody, until next time, please stay safe, be kind to one another, and we'll talk again real soon right here on Locked On Commanders, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.